I am Johan Pion, and I'm going to explain some essential elements for talent identification and development in order to find the future champions. Malaysia faces a huge amount of competition with other countries when it comes to sport systems. And therefore, we think that there should be a well-developed talent system for Malaysia. This is crucial. But competing against China, America, Russia, and Canada is difficult at this moment. Therefore, we try to implement an ecosystem where we try to move from a selection system to a development system. Most systems in Russia, America, China uses the selection systems, and we try to identify and develop all high potentials. So when it comes to selecting, you have to think that you also deselect, and that's a big problem. We try also to bring all the sport professionals together in this system. When we identify and develop the future champions, we already start thinking in the schools 16 years before the podium. And it's not only thinking about the medals at the Olympics, but it's the complete development line from the beginning, from grassroots to the end. And that means that instead of thinking in terms of performance or in terms of development, we think with the both arrows in the same way. So the development and performance go hand in hand. And detecting future champions starts in the schools, where we start with 4 motor tests. And those 4 motor tests are part of KTK, the Körperkoordinationstest für Kinder, where we have 3 tests, a balance test and 2 locomotion tests with jumping sideways and moving sideways, and we added a 4th test with the Faber eye-hand coordination test to add also the object control. And that means that we have a tool, and we also had some we had some experience with the development of a tool to assess fundamental movement skills in these applied settings. So these are 3 very important articles that we wrote with our group to bring again the talent detection. Now, how can we use these talent detection in Malaysia? Well, let's start with basic tests in schools and measure the fundamental movement skills. That will help us to find the better movers. That's probably the first step to do. And then we can start with the other part, and in the Netherlands we use it with the municipalities, but I think in Malaysia we have to think about the schools and the clubs and the role from school to club. So we add 11 additional generic tests, and we do some orientation of the children towards the sport they like to do, the preferences. Therefore, we use the I Like app that you see here. It is an orientation based on preferences. That means that we ask the children if they like to balance or throw a ball, play outdoors or indoors, and then we find the right sports for them. And another way is that we measure the competencies, and then we measure, of course, the motor coordination, which is in the underline, the KTK balance and so on. We already saw that, but we add this physical performance test and also the anthropometry. So when you use this orientation based on competencies, you see that there are differences between the sports. Badminton and basketball and so on all have different measures when it comes to stature. We see that volleyball players, basketball players are the tallest and the gymnasts are the smallest. But we also do this for other competencies. And like, for example, the endurance shuttle run, or like, for example, the fundamental movement skills. But most important is that you have some benchmarks, because it's always difficult to find out what those numbers mean. What does it mean, a boy measuring 135 centimeters and jumping 147 centimeters? It is a very difficult story, because you can't say this is good or bad for basketball. But with the benchmarks, it is possible to find out if you have the capacities for example, fencing. Well, 93 is just under average. Average is 100. So let's say that the jump that this boy has at this age of 10 is not sufficient to become a very good fencer. If you look at gymnastics, he's already too tall. And for triathlon, for example, we see that he's got a lot of fast twitch fibers, which is not that bad, because if you train his endurance, he will become good. And in the end, probably with the fast twitch fibers, he can win the sprint of a triathlon, which is good, of course. And then in basketball, well, it doesn't make sense to make a basketball player out of him, because he's got very low scores for height and jumping, which is very necessary in basketball. And in badminton, for example, he scores under average. This gives us an idea of profiling the children, and we don't do this only for those two tests, but we have a complete test battery with 15 tests that helps us to orient the children. So this was also published in the European Journal of Sports Sciences, and you see that we could extract those 9 sports with this research. Now, the Sports Compass is the next generation of talent identification models. It is based on what happened before in Australia with the Sports Search, and it is a set of test batteries that include motor competence. This is very new. The motor competence is an added value because it shows you something about the potential of somebody. And another thing is that the complete system is built to connect all the sports professionals, the schools and the clubs. And in the end, also, we have a lot of attention for online tools for detection, orientation, and identification. This is what our team does at Han University and at Ghent University. So we tested in Flanders more than 40,000 children in the schools, more than 50,000 athletes in clubs since 2007. This year we will test 15,000 children. And in the Netherlands, we started in 2016. We already tested more than 10,000 children in the schools and 1,000 athletes in the clubs. This month, we tested 6,000 children, and the aim is by the end of 2020 to test 20,000 children in Gelderland in Holland. So the program is expanding more and more. And also other countries like Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia are interested to start with this kind of testing. So in Indonesia, we have the aim to test in all schools. In Malaysia, we try to build up a new system, and we will see if we can start to test and detect the children in the schools and to help them find the right sport to become future champions. Now, these tools that we use are easy to use with your cell phone at the moment, and you see that we have some reports for the children, but also for the clubs and the trainers. We have other reports where you see the strengths and the weaknesses of every child. So how can you implement this talent orientation in Malaysia? First of all, it's important to do the basic tests in the schools, because you need to know who are the better movers, and then you can help those better movers to find the sport that links to the capacities of these movers. And next step is, how can we identify the future champions? Because this is also very important. And we connect, of course, those test batteries with each other, which means that we still continue with the 4 motor test. We continue with the relevant generic test, because it's not relevant to do a dribbling test in gymnastics, or it is a little bit less relevant to look at the balance beam test for volleyball players. And in the end, we add some sport-specific tests to have a specific test battery for different sports. And it was possible to identify future champions. We did a lot of studies with different sports. The upper row is individual sports, the lower row are the team sports. And you see that we, with my colleagues in Ghent University, with Rosalie Noriali Wazir, we did some research in Taekwondo, in fencing, and in Judo. We also did some research in gymnastics and in soccer, handball, volleyball, and basketball. And we published these kind of studies. And the main thing is that in these studies, we use these fundamental movement skills as a basic line to see if people are good movers. And we saw that in volleyball, for example, the girls that we tested 8 years before the European Championships and they got the medal, that the girls that got the medal had the highest scores on those 4 basic tests of coordination. And the same applies to all the sports that you see here on the screen. So it is important to have those fundamental movement skills in your test battery. And this is an example of how we rebuild the generic sports compass towards a sports-specific test battery. And it gives us an idea of the good movers and the worst movers in a group. And we identified gymnasts in a group of 756 gymnasts. It was possible to find out who could be a champion in the future. And therefore, we applied a lot of new statistical techniques. One of the techniques that we applied was a survival analysis, because what we see is that you start at a certain moment with very talented children, and after 5 years, only 15% is left in the group. So makes that you lose 85%, and this talent loss is very important. We should think in another way. And so we have to adapt our selection system, and we try to give more attention to the development of all children so that we can keep them longer in our system. And it's not only motivation which counts to stay in your sport. We see that at the age of 7, if you don't sprint faster than 3.90 or 4.28, you have 70% more chance to drop out, and that's important. And we did not only see that for a sprint, but we also saw that for all different tests in the complete test battery. So it was possible to detect this girl. She became a world champion in gymnastics. The only thing was that she was a bit too tall at the age of 7, and normally in China she would never have the chance to become an Olympic, a world champion in gymnastics. And we try to make, to find the strengths in her profile and to rethink how we could make her the best gymnast and on the uneven bars. Her negative point, her stature, was turned into a positive point where she had longer swings than you normally see with the Chinese little girls that swing on the high bars. It is much nicer to look at an athlete who's got a very long swing, and that's why she became a world champion as well. So we have to turn your weaknesses into strengths, and that's also important when you look at the next future Olympic champions. You have to look at their strengths. Now, we have several tools to register all those numbers and to find out what are the weaknesses. How can we improve that in Malaysia? Well, we all know that Lee Chong Wei is top in Malaysia with badminton, and if you look at the next champion in Malaysia, you should know about the capacities that you need. You need agility, speed. You have to hit, jump, and you need a good balance. So those are the prerequisites for your performance in the future. And we try to detect that in the children. So we built our test battery, and you see agility. We have the 10 times 5 meter shuttle sprint, which is in the sports compass already, and the jumping sideways and moving sideways. For speed, we have a sprint 5 meters. It is an additional test because it is not in the sports compass. The object control, we have the Faber eye-hand coordination, which is in the sports compass. The standing broad jump and the counter movement shows something about our jumping capacities. The counter movement jump is an additional one. And then the balance is already in the sports compass, and, the knee push-ups and the curl-ups are, of course, also in the sports compass. And with this test battery, we have a lot of numbers. And normally what we did 30 years ago was thinking about the physical quotient and look at how the athletes are at that time. Well, that's not the most important question, because a trainer wants to know how good he will be in the future, and therefore you need this motor quotient. The addition, the combination of the physical and the motor quotient makes us a complete other total quotient, which means that you have different people in your system. And so the lines move in a different way. Instead of keeping the green guys in your selection, we have a complete other selection. And it shows us that we have more potential in our group. So how can you improve this talent identification system in Malaysia? Well, first of all, again, look at the basic tests in the schools, try to find the best sport for your athletes, and try to identify them by using the right tools in your clubs as well. And then you can, in the end, also transfer people, and so that they can look to another sports where they probably can win the medals. That's for the federation. So, for example, if you have this profile for badminton where all the lights are green, and you put your numbers against that, you see that the guy, player 7 here, has some yellow dots in his profile. You have to adjust that by developing this player to become good in every part of the test battery. And then probably you can train him not only in badminton, but you can find other sports that accord to the badminton. Now, the system that you see here is a matrix where we build it for volleyball. Everything was perfect. And then you see where you can find exercises for balance or speed or whatever, in which sports you can try to transfer those capacities. So for Malaysia, again, it's important to implement the talent transfer in the system as a part of the development of the athletes. So instead of thinking in terms of sampling sports in the schools and specializing in the clubs, there are some ways in between where you can have a broader specialization and a directed sampling. So the talent development of the 6 athletes that we have in our pool, we see that we have different players with different maturity status. The orange guys are early matures, the gray guys are late matures. And a one-fits-all development pathway will, of course, cause demotivation, can implement injuries, and you will have a lot of dropouts. So you have to be sure that you develop your early mature players and that you think about the risk that they can be injured and you have to reduce the load. So every player is unique, and you see here which capacities you have to change. So both guys show that you have to reduce the training load the next year, and so they will improve a little slower than the later mature peers, and they will have probably also a risk for demotivation. If you look at the normal developing players, you see that everything goes smooth. They are in the first growth spurt, but what you can't do is you can't continue to train their speed and agility because you have to reduce the load, but you can work on their endurance and their core stability, for example. So younger player number 17 here will improve faster with less risk for injuries than player 8. So it is important to look at each player separately. And then for the late maturers, well, everything is still possible, and there you can have much more training load. So both players are more resilient to training in this case, and they will probably move faster than the other guys. So if you look at all those different pathways, we selected 6 guys for the elite sports schools in Bukit Jalil, and we see that we want to train them all like we have trained Li Shongwei. So everybody will have a very strict training, and then you have a risk for injuries, of course, for the early maturers who are in their second growth spurt, and the late maturers can continue much faster with low injury risk. So that will cause also a demotivation for the early maturers, and you will see that by the end of the year you will have or a lot of injuries or a lot of demotivation if you don't work on a separate pathway. So the take-home message is that probably we have to reorganize a talent identification and development system. And the most important thing is that we should enlarge all talent pools, and we have to think in terms of development and not in terms of selection, because if you deselect high potentials, you know that they never will come back. Thank you for your attention.